So, hello, good afternoon, namaskar. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. My name is Parul Goswami. I'm a senior program manager at DataLEADS. So, on behalf of the GNI India Training Network and DataLEADS, I welcome each one of you. The Google News Initiative India Training Network, led by DataLEADS, is conducting a series of special webinars for Indian journalists, journalism students, media educators, and bloggers. These monthly webinars have a special and a unique topics with a common aim to strengthen and support newsrooms and share new tools and learning with journalists and media students. Before talking about today's workshop, I want to share and talk about a wonderful network. We started this remarkable journey in 2018. The Google News Initiative India Training Network is one of the world's biggest and most impactful fact checking training networks. The aim of the network is to empower journalists and newsrooms across India in with the skills and digital tools for they need to tell more informed stories. The network is led by DataLEADS, and the network has so far trained thousands of journalists, media educators, fact checkers, and journalism students in more than 15 plus languages across India, benefiting thousands of newsrooms and universities. These are some of the impactful numbers over the 5 years of our journey. These are some of our wonderful training moments. In fact, while I'm talking right now, there'll be a training happening in some city of the country. In 2022, we expanded the network and added 100 new trainers and 5 new languages. And very importantly, we added two main topics: data verification and climate change verification. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start the session today. If you have any questions, please share them on a Q&A tab, and we will take as many questions as the time allows. And also, this session is under the Chatham House rule, which means you're free to use any of this information from this webinar, but please do not quote anyone. Neither the identity of the speaker nor their organization affiliations will be revealed. Um, so today's session is on climate change verification. And, women around the world are uniquely impacted by climate change. A greater threat now is the misinformation around climate change, which not only undermines the climate action, but also affects the lives and livelihoods of women in particular. And this is our little way of we wanted to do it this on Women's Day. Like tomorrow is women International Women's Day, and we wanted to do something different, and we wanted to focus on combating misinformation on climate change, and therefore we organizing this session today on climate change verification. Now I would like to invite Aditi Tandon. She's production editor with Mongabay, India, and she's also a trainer with the GNI India Training Network. And thank you very much, Aditi. Over to you now.
Thank you, Parul. Hi, everyone. Great that all of you could take some time today to meet us. I'm just going to share my screen a bit. Give me 1 second. Okay, I guess everyone can see this, right? Yeah, so I'm quite happy to be part of this Women's Day special session. I mean, as Parul mentioned, women are uniquely impacted by climate change, and when you add misinformation to it, things get murkier. And talking about women and climate change, that's a whole huge area to discuss, to debate. Uh, Today, we're going to focus particularly on misinformation, and this impacts everyone. I'm just going to put a little, sorry, yeah, in the chat, in case anyone wants to read more about, how women are uniquely impacted by environmental change, climate change. We have a list of stories in a special series, so you can get a sense of how, I mean, it's a Women's Day special, so you can get a sense of how it's impacting women all over the world, especially in India. But today, let me start with climate change verification, the topic that we're going to discuss today. So this training, of course, is by DataLEADS, as Parul mentioned, and part of the Google News Initiative India Training Network. Are you all able to see my screen? Parul, can you just confirm that you're able to see a slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes, I can
great.
see it.
Great. So what we'll talk about today is what is climate change, misinformation, disinformation, why is it problematic, what are the drivers, and some of the common myths and facts, and how you can address climate change misinformation. What are some of the tools that you can use? What are some of the legitimate sources that are out there for you to access? So before we get into this session, I think most of us here are either journalists or media educators, fact checkers. We are fact checking organizations. We work with media companies, communicators of some sort. So I just want to say that when we talk about climate change, as journalists, as communicators, we're not expected to be experts. Just as when you cover, say, health, you're not expected to be a doctor. So we're not expected to be climate experts, but we're expected to be journalists. We're expected to be fact checkers because that's the skill that we're trained in. And that is the skill we use to work to address climate misinformation as well. So I know sometimes climate change can get like a bit of an intimidating topic, but we won't go too deep into the science. Keep your journalist fact-checking hat on, and we'll address it in that way. So just for context and awareness, what is climate change? So there is scientific consensus that climate change is real, it exists, and let that be the first established fact as we go along in this training. Because for a long time, the very existence of climate change was questioned by climate deniers. But in recent years, there is a lot of scientific research. There is consensus that climate change does exist, and its impacts are visible all over the world. So even the deniers don't outrightly deny climate change, but there are people who do spread misinformation or disinformation for several reasons, which we learn in the following slides. Climate change itself is the average weather in a place over many years, and it's the long-term shift in weather and temperature patterns. And you'll notice that I've highlighted many years and long-term shift. This is just to highlight that climate change, when you research it, when you study it, it's something that happens over a long period of time. So there is uncertainty associated with it. There is changing information as more research develops. This unfortunately leaves room for misinformation to spread in, because sometimes scientists don't have absolute answers, but it's something to be aware of and report as well. And we'll talk about this later on reporting the uncertainties as well. So that's why I wanted to focus that it's a long-term shift in weather patterns. So if yesterday it was, a certain temperature in the world and today it's different, that is not accurate to say that, from yesterday to today, climate change has happened. It's a long-term research. And why are we talking about climate change today? So it is one of the biggest threats of our times, and it's not something tangible. Like, I can't hold something and say, look, this is climate change. It's not something that has immediate effect, that I measure climate change and tomorrow I'm seeing the impact. Like I mentioned, it's long term, and the long term impacts are clearly visible around the world. We're seeing increasing intensity and frequency of heat waves, floods, and other extreme weather events. And what I've listed on the slide are some of the long-term impacts of climate change. It threatens livelihoods. Some regions could become uninhabitable. There are, of course, human deaths related to floods or cyclones or heat waves. So there is, the cost of climate change is high, and that is why it's important to care about it, and even more important, to stop misinformation around it. So before we go ahead, let's just take a look at some of the images that were doing, the rounds on WhatsApp and social media recently. This one was shared during the COP27 climate conference in December 2022. So this is the UN climate conference. This was all over social media. I got it on WhatsApp. What do you think this post is trying to say? If anyone wants to just comment in the chat. So in effect, it's kind of criticizing delegates who are traveling by planes to a climate conference. The post, more emissions. The post is trying to highlight the hypocrisy of choosing a high emission mode of travel to go to a conference where you're going to talk about reducing emissions. And I mean, this answer will be, Umesh, that's correct. The leader's contribution is talks only. This is hypocrisy. That's the kind of narrative this post is trying to take. Do you think this is real or fake? Yeah, I think we're in a fact-checking sessions. I think many of you will say fake, which is true. But I'll explain why it's fake. So this image, if you do a Google image search, is completely unrelated to the climate conference. It's from 2016, not from 2022. It's from Dubai. And it's a combination of images of flights that are taking off in Dubai. And this was a composite image created by photographer Mike Kelly. And his images from various airports around the world were published in BBC in 2016. I'm sharing the link of, where it comes from. So this is a created image, and it's nothing related to the climate conference. But using an old unrelated image, attaching a false context to it, is one of the way that mis or disinformation is created. And this narrative of portraying the climate movement as hypocritical, as foolish, is common it's a common narrative when we're talking about climate change disinformation. I'll show you another example. Yeah. So here's another example of what we just discussed. This is again a technique which is used in other types of misinformation as well, which is you caption images and videos in misleading ways to foster specific narratives and agenda. And here too, this image has nothing related to what the post talks about. The post talks about a climate conference, the same, hypocrisy, all of that. But it's using an image that is from 2013, not from 21, which the post talks about. It's business jets that were in New Orleans Lakefront Airport for the Super Bowl, which is a sporting event in the US. Okay, so it's got nothing to do with climate change, nothing to do with the climate conference, but captioning these images and videos in misleading ways is how you foster certain narratives. And every year, this picture surfaces during climate change conference. It has been debunked by Reuters and other fact-checking organizations. but it keeps coming up. It's an old image used with a false context. We see this across various types of misinformation as well, where you push a narrative using these false images. So the examples we just saw are just few of the examples of climate misinformation. These are the ones which are just very stark and obvious. You always see them every year on social media, on WhatsApp. And climate misinformation by itself is still developing. There are various kind of versions of it. What I showed you was just one type of example. But like any other kind of misinformation, it uses false or misleading information. It makes one question whether climate change actually exists and whether are its impacts actually negative. You start questioning that when you see these kind of posts. It misrepresents data. It uses greenwashing, which means it claims that something is good for the environment when in fact it is not. And we've seen this in, say, during the pandemic as well, about COVID, for example. There was false and misleading information. It made people confused and, made people wonder, like, is COVID actually that bad? There was misrepresentation of data. There was, solutions which were said that they are good for COVID, but in fact, they were more harmful. So it's the same kind of techniques and tactics we see even in climate change misinformation, is to confuse, is to, make you question whether climate change is a risk. And why is it problematic? Like I just mentioned, it confuses you. People don't know who to trust. They don't, don't get to the accurate information. It also ignores the work that scientists have done and are doing. And it, like with all types of misinformation, it becomes another subject to fuel polarization. And in turn, it can impact policy, which can have further harmful impacts on the environment. It leads to misperceptions. People begin to disregard the risk or the urgency, and this eventually delays climate action, which is what a lot of organizations that are funding climate misinformation are looking for, because they know they can't outrightly deny climate change, but they can delay it. So this is a game. I'm not going to play it now because we want to keep within time. If we have time at the end of the session, we'll play it. But I do want you, even if we don't get to it in this session, I want you to, just try playing it by yourself. It's a fun and easy way to explain what are the tactics of climate misinformation that are used across the world. And especially if there are any GNI trainers here, if you are training on the climate verification module, definitely play this game in the classroom. It gives you a sense of, in an easy way, of all the techniques that are used in climate misinformation. So these are just some of the examples of misinformation that we've seen in Indian and South Asian media. We have a political leader in Pakistan claiming that earthquakes are because of women wearing jeans. The Kerala floods were widely associated with climate change. But again, if you remember at the start, I mentioned that climate change is a long-term measure of weather change and weather patterns changing. But a study found that there was no long-term increase in mean heavy monsoon rainfall in Kerala. So making that link that the floods were only because of climate change is not exactly accurate. There's more context, more layers to it. Okay. We had a popular figure claim that since women were allowed to enter the Sabrimala temples, there have been increasing rains, untimely rains. We see this claims which link faith to climate change in a lot of misinformation around the subject. And we also see, in certain, the last is actually a clip from a Hindi news media where you exaggerate or sensationalize certain findings. So in Hindi, for example, the speaker in this news clip says, Bharat tapti bhatti ki tarah ho raha hai, means India will be like a hot oven. This is a sensational way, exaggerated way of presenting scientific findings. There's no source to the information and no kind of data to support what a hot oven means. So it just exaggerates the claim that, the global warming claim. So based on these are just few examples because there are plenty more. Can you guess what are some of the reasons that climate misinformation spreads? Just something in these examples, does it make you think that maybe this is the reason why climate misinformation is spreading? You can add answers in chat, and of course I'll be giving you the answers as well, but fear of an uncertain future, superstition, absolutely, yeah, these are definitely some of the reasons. Ignorance is a big one. Like I would say in India, the lack of climate knowledge or lack of awareness, Tanushri has said, these are the primary factors driving climate misinformation in India. Globally, there are other reasons. There is funded misinformation, but in India, it's lack of climate knowledge, education, awareness. Amazing. I think all of you have kind of got very good answers up there. But yeah, so I would say lack of climate knowledge, education, then trivialization of science, or trying to exaggerate scientific findings to make it accessible to people, which I agree, as journalists, we sometimes do need to kind of simplify science. But there is a thin line between simplifying it. Like we shouldn't undermine the intelligence of our readers as well, right? We should, they do understand what's going on. So oversimplification is an issue. There's an absence of like a top-down nodal source of information on climate change. You don't have like, if I want authentic information on climate change, what is the nodal agency that I should go to for that? We don't have something like that in India for various reasons, but there isn't one at the moment. There are, like we saw, faith-based practices. One of the most important ones in India specifically is India's geographical expanse and linguistic diversity. So a lot of the climate change research is in English language. A lot of the research done globally is in English language. For that to percolate down to different languages and different geographies, it does leave room for misinterpretation, mistranslation. So that is one of the major reasons why climate change misinformation spreads in India. And this is just a sense of how this disinformation or misinformation circulates, okay? And where do you think media falls in this web of climate misinformation? Media, fact checkers, journalists, particularly educators. We are all disseminators. We are the ones spreading this information. We are also part of the general public, so we are consuming this information. And possibly, I hope no one of us is creating this misinformation. Two small circles, text not visible. Okay, Umesh, so basically I'll just read this out. The possible funders are usually corporates and philanthropic industries, culture and faith-based organizations, conservative organizations. The creators are, again, political organizations, climate deniers, greenwashing advocacy groups. The disseminators are media, the social media content creators, of course, users on WhatsApp and closed messaging apps, politicians, again, cultural organizations are all disseminators, and the consumers is the general public. So everyone is at the receiving end of this misinformation. And like with any other kind of, mis or disinformation out there, including health and political, there are multiple reasons why people would share inaccurate information around climate change. In a lot of cases, most cases perhaps, it is a genuine, mistake. it's a bad judgment because of poor knowledge. The person may not be able to understand what it is and unintentionally spread the information. Mistake is usually the highest reason why misinformation spreads, but we see financial reasons, publicity. In North America and Europe in particular, fossil fuel agencies funding misinformation is a big problem. In India, so far, we've not seen it at that extent that it is in North America and Europe. But just for us to know that this can also exist at some point, it probably does, and it's not at that scale yet. There are people who do this for benefits. So now we'll just move on to some of the common myths around climate change. You may have heard of this. Some of us may even believe it, but I'll just give you like a myth and fact so that it comes out in various forms, but it's just good awareness when you're doing fact checking around climate change. So one of the common myths is that the Earth's climate is always changing. This is normal. Earth has a way of bouncing back. And while that, yes, Earth's climate is changing, that is true. But the key fact here is the pace of climate change, which is the problem. Okay, so climate doesn't change as rapidly as it is changing now. That is the problem. Temperatures around the world are the record highest, and high temperatures are linked to increasing levels of carbon dioxide. So what we're experiencing now, this rapid pace of climate change, is caused by humans because of burning coal, oil, and gas, cutting down of trees. So the myth that climate is always changing, Earth is going to be fine, that's all good, but climate has never changed at the pace that it is changing now, and that is the problem. Another myth is that plants need carbon dioxide. So what's the problem with carbon dioxide emissions? The plants are it's more food for the plants. It's necessary for existence of life on Earth. So why are we considering carbon dioxide a pollutant? And while, yes, plants take in carbon dioxide, we've all learned this in school, but it's the quantity of carbon dioxide that we're producing in industrial and vehicular emissions. That quantity has nowhere to go, and that is warming up the planet. One of the favorite claims of contrarians is that CO2 is plant food. Why should we consider it a pollutant? But we're at a point where the amount of carbon dioxide levels, they don't benefit plant growth. The rising heat that comes with carbon dioxide is detrimental to plant productivity. And we've seen this in India, like the prolonged heat wave last year, it impacted wheat and other crop yields. So saying that crops and plants are going to absorb all the carbon, so it's all good, is not true, because the amount of carbon dioxide is way too much for plants to absorb. Another myth is that, it's extremely cold in many parts of the world. So why are you calling it global warming? And global warming, like I said, is again a long-term measure of, the increase in temperature. And we see it in the form of not that, it's hot here, cold here. Places are going to get hotter, and colder places are going to get more rain, more snow. There's going to be more heat waves. There's going to be more floods, more cyclones. These are how the intensity of all this is going to increase. The likelihood is going to increase. That's how climate change kind of has an impact. Just measuring the temperature today and tomorrow is not climate change. It's just the temperature of that day. Another myth is that, this climate change impacts way into the future. Why are we worrying about it now? A couple of generations later, we don't need to think about it now. This is actually a climate delay tactic. It's a way to delay action on climate change. And the drastic effects are here. Like, there is scientific data, there is research, and it's all globally available. And in Paris, all world leaders, including India, agreed to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees increase. And if we have this kind of global consensus based on scientific data, it's very hard to say that it's something in the future. Like what is the basis of saying that it's in the future when there's enough of information available to say that it is happening now? And just for context, if anyone wants to read up about what 1.5 degrees increase means, the IPCC report, which is a climate change report by the UN, that kind of gives a good definition of like what happens when we reach this 1.5 degrees increase, what does it mean at all, and what is the time period that you're looking at. The IPCC report has good explanation of that if you want to refer to it. And another one is that fossil fuels are good, the world will sustain on it. Why don't you change your living, to try a bamboo toothbrush, for example, so this shifting of the onus on individual actions while ignoring fossil fuels is one of the dangerous kind of narratives in climate change misinformation, because making a shift away from fossil fuels is the most important step to take towards acting on climate change. There are also many actions that are passed off as positive climate action without understanding the context. So I'll go back to the bamboo toothbrush. Like, I have nothing against bamboo toothbrushes. They're great, they are a sustainable option. But we have to see the context. Like, bamboo toothbrushes could stop land from being put to better use, such as for increasing biodiversity. So there may be a better use to that land, which we're using for just increasing bamboo crop. There's also like certain components of bamboo brushes, maybe nylon bristles, which is plastic, and they are not biodegradable. So there's so much context to all of this that there's no like a yes and no solution. There's no like, if you start doing this, everything's going to be great. If you start doing that, everything's going to be great. We just have to be aware. And a lot of the misinformation is directed in that individual action direction, so that you stop thinking about fossil fuels as a problem, whereas fossil fuels is one of the major problems in the world, which contribute to climate change. This is another common one. We see this again around climate conferences where India and China are blaming the global north is blaming the global south, India and China are responsible for climate change. So while, that the data shows that, yeah, India and China are among the biggest carbon emitters currently, but it's not accurate to say they're responsible for climate change, because the data doesn't include historical figures. India and China are not exclusively contributing to the lion's share of emissions, because this misinformation is just cherry-picked information around these conferences to polarize the climate discussion so that nothing moves forward. And again, it doesn't factor in like per capita emissions, because of course the populations of India and China are much bigger. So per capita emissions are lower than some nations. But if you just look at emissions as a number, then it may show higher. So it's like how you interpret the data, what data you're putting out there. The data can very easily be cherry-picked and used to derail conversations and discussions. And what we saw, like these few myths and facts are just some of the common ones. They keep reappearing in various forms. I am not sure if you can read the related myths, but I'm just like, there are many myths and they're all linked to one or the other of the myths the common myths that I just shared. So when you're faced with this, what is it that you can do as a journalist, as a fact checker, as a media educator, or even as someone who is a communicator, or just maybe in your WhatsApp groups, what can you do? One of the things is, the best way probably is to spread facts. To stop misinformation is to spread good information at every opportunity you get. And pre-bunking particularly is the process of debunking lies and tactics before they strike. And this can be used in any kind of misinformation. When we talk about climate change specifically, a simple way to pre-bunk is to highlight the science, the scientific consensus, that there is unanimous agreement among scientists that climate change exists, it's real. So highlighting that, and then you can go deeper into fact-based pre-bunking, like correcting a specific false claim or narrative that keeps coming up. That can be one pathway that, say, a fact-checking organization can take. Another is logic-based, so explaining all the tactics of misinformation that can be used to spread misinformation. Like I said, cherry-picking data or using images with false context. You explain these tactics. So that's logic-based pre-bunking. And then also pointing out bad sources of information. So if I'm saying that, if I'm reporting on, if I'm a fact-checking organization trying to report on climate misinformation, around the world, there are organizations that highlight bad sources of information, that this person is known to spread misinformation about climate change. So every time you see information come from this person, you know that it's not good information. So there are ways to, in India, it's a bit more complex because I don't think there are, at the moment, like people just dedicated on spreading climate misinformation like there are in other countries. But something to be aware of, something which hopefully won't, but might come up in the future. So pointing out bad sources of information is also a good way to do pre-bunking. So in this, let's do a short exercise. I'll give you the context and either you can like search for these names or I'll send you the links. So imagine you're writing a news article on the IPCC report. Okay, this is an important report by the United Nations, which tells you the status of climate change, climate actions. Okay, and I've told you these are the 4 people you can interview. I mean, among these, you have to select whom to interview for the report. If you can, I'm sending you the link, the bios. If you can just read the bios quickly and tell me any one person who would be like your primary person to interview for this report. Okay, just give me a second. I'm just pasting all of these in the chat. I mean, you can also Google it if you want, but just in case you want to. One more. Okay, this is just a cursory search I've done, and just based on that, tell me who would be one person that you would interview for a report on climate change. Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to share the answer. But if someone has answers, just, mention in the chat, Chandni Singh. Yeah, most of you, I mean, as of now, are saying Chandni Singh, someone saying Steve Malloy, Chandni. So I would agree with Chandni Singh because if you read her bio, she is the lead author on the IPCC report, which is the report that you are writing about. She studies the linkages between climate change and development. So there is a direct reason why she would be the first option for you to interview. So I'm glad a lot of you have selected her. Joyshri Roy, yes, also has some linkages to climate change. So she would be a good second option. Chandni Singh first because she's contributed to this IPCC report. Stephen Malloy, someone said that. I would say no, because if you Google and you do a bit of research, he is part of a lot of misinformation organizations. Though he calls himself, someone who spreads scientific information, if you just dig a bit deeper, he is anti-science, like anti-science that the government is depending on to kind of spread information about climate change. He's anti-science. And Dr. Bikash Chakrabarti is also a scientist. So but why I wouldn't select him is because he's not a climate scientist, he's a physicist. So he may be an authority to speak on physics, but not on climate change. So just when you're doing experts, when you're selecting experts, these are just some things to keep in mind. Like every scientist is not, Stephen served in the Trump administration, and that should speak a lot about him as well. So when you are, so it's good to just do a bit of research on sources, because a lot of times, and this happens a lot, where someone will say, I'm a scientist. Yeah, they may be a scientist, but they may be studying, I don't know, tigers. Why would you speak about climate change to them unless there's a link between tigers and climate change, which also exists? So it's important to just keep a tab on the experts you're speaking to. This again is going back to what we discussed. The image on the left is from the World Economic Forum in Davos. The other two are from the COP26 climate conference. There's images of jets in the first and second one. Again, common piece of misinformation when they're actually not from the climate conferences. These have been debunked before. Even the last one has been debunked. So this kind of misinformation keeps coming up during climate conferences. So monitoring this calendar of events, you know that in December, this event is going to happen. So keep monitoring that and seeing misinformation arise around that time. It helps you prepare in advance, and it also helps you put out information preemptively. So these are just some examples of conspiracy theories. The tweet on the left is a more obvious example. The report on the right is actually from one of an Indian newspaper. It refers to a research facility in the US. And there has been conspiracy for a long time in the US about natural disasters being linked to this research facility. And it keeps coming up, there's all sorts of conspiracies around it. So of course, someone in India picked it up and didn't, like if you just do a Google search, you'll find out that this is a conspiracy theory. So, it's always good to keep your antenna on. And conspiracy theories, we've seen this in other kinds of misinformation. They'll use extreme language, they'll link to dubious papers, there's always a secret plot. They falsely suggest that there's no accident, everything is interlinked. Polarizing language, suspicious URLs, all of this is signs of conspiracy theories. So this is a bit of a nuanced thing. There are two headlines here. The first one stresses on the likelihood of heat wave occurring because of climate change. So it says climate change is 30 times more likely. And heat waves 30 times more likely because of climate change. The second one says climate change is the cause of heat wave. So there's a very minor kind of difference in the way these headlines are crafted. But the first one is more accurate because climate change cannot be the sole cause of a heat wave or some flood or another extreme weather events, because most of them have multiple causes. But climate change can affect the likelihood, like how likely is it going to be? It can affect the intensity. It can affect the frequency of these events. And that's why the first headline is more accurate than the second one, because it doesn't just attribute attribute a heat wave to climate change solely. Like it makes the links, it says that there is an increased likelihood. So that's why I would go with the first headline, and beware of this false attribution. Like it's kind of, climate change has become a buzzword. So saying that everything is caused by climate change is quite a common kind of tactic, but beware of that. And uh, I'm sharing this also, this World Weather Attribution. It's a reporting guide for journalists on climate attribution. So just making sure that when should you attribute something to climate change, when should you say that, there's more information required. And this is what I was mentioning at the start, like science has uncertainties, research takes time, climate change is something which happens over a long term. So the demand for like unrealistic proof leads to higher chance of misinformation. You have people saying, tell me why, tell me now why. So it's okay to include this uncertainty in your reporting, that you talk that you say that, this information could change, this is what we have now. That's more accurate than saying that this is the absolute answer. And this again, some scientific claims, sometimes we say we believe that every scientific looking paper is absolutely true, but don't take it at face value. Again, put on your journalistic cap, ask questions. This was an example of a 2019 scientific study which said like planting billions of trees across the world is the best way to tackle climate change. But it inspired like some campaigns. There's like a lot of hoo-ha all over the world until some scientists sat and dug through the report, bit by bit, and they found that there are many discrepancies in the report, and the scientists had to pull back the paper or make some changes to it. Okay, and you will also, as journalists, you'll be inundated with pitches about climate change research. You'll have PR professionals telling you about technology. You must kind of keep an eye on, like good journalists, don't rely solely on press releases, verify with an independent expert, check the legitimacy of the journal, whether there's any conflict of interest. Those are just some of your regular journalistic skills that you have to put into action. And again, when reporting on, a paper, you question the methodology. This is important, especially when you're writing about surveys that happen every year, like tiger census, for example, okay, or rainfall. So when you're comparing results, you should also compare methodology. Did something change in this year? And has that influenced the number? Like if you just take the absolute numbers and compare them, yes, it's showing a rise. But what does this rise mean? Did something else happen? Were there more cameras placed in this year's research versus last year's survey? So, these are a lot of questions to keep asking. What's the sample size? Did they, interview 10 people or 10,000 people? What's the time frame? What happened? Was the survey taken, did it happen during COVID? Did the lockdowns impact the results? So there are a lot of like little things in methodology that are important to take into consideration. Predatory journals, these are scientific journals that are paid for, as in someone, I can pay to get my research published in this journal. So as you can imagine, these are not authentic. And some of the ways to identify these fraudulent journals usually is, by the looks of it, they always have like a complicated name. They look, they're very poorly designed, lots of jargon. There's no context, no core, data is not presented in a clean way. And again, all of this, it's good to be aware of, but it's also good to always speak to experts when you're doing this kind of reporting, because they will help you kind of identify, because not all of us are experts in identifying these kind of journals, but it's just something to be aware that this exists. And one of the last things, what we spoke about in the beginning is, one of the drivers of climate change, misinformation, especially in India, is low climate literacy. Climate change is poorly discussed, poorly understood. It leads to misperceptions, misinterpretations. And media can be part of this by conveying accurate information about climate change. We have like explainers that a lot of organizations are doing, which simplify concepts. There's solution journalism where the media kind of talks about actions that are taken and whether they are good or not. There's a lot of misconceptions that we can break down by accurate reporting. This misconception about like plant trees everywhere, everything's going to be great. That can be broken down because there is research that shows that if you plant the wrong kind of trees in a wrong place, it can actually have more harm than good. So those were some of the kind of tools to work with this climate misinformation. Fact-checking websites, all of you who are part of the fact-checking network, you know about the IFCNet pointer. It has many Indian organizations as well. All of these organizations do all sorts of misinformation bunking. So that's a good place to look for information as well, to check if things are already pre-bunked. There are a lot of legitimate sources globally on climate change, which have scientists working all through the year on this topic. So there are many legitimate sources. There are good media organizations. And I don't want to put a plug for Mongabay India, but it's on the list because I do think it is a legitimate organization. But there are other Indian and global organizations that do good reporting on environment and climate change. So they are good places to refer to. And that just leaves us with a little time for questions. Parul, do you want to take over?
Yes. So thank you. Thank you so much, Aditi, for such a wonderful, interesting, and such an insightful session. And if we have any questions, please, I'll just put it on your chat box. We have one. What to do when too much technicality cloud
Clouds
us?
us.
When
Yeah.
there's too much technicality, too much technical jargon, I guess that's what the question
Yeah.
meant.
Exactly. And like I said, none of us are climate experts. You will always find jargon and technical terms, but you can rely on experts. So if you were reporting on, say, the pandemic, okay, who would you go to? You may not understand what a virus is or what where vaccine is, but you would go to an expert to get those answers, right? So we as journalists are the bridge between the experts or the scientists and the general public. We have to dig out, investigate, get that information, put it in a way that is easily understandable by the general public. So when too much technicality clouds us, reach out to experts, reach out to diverse experts, because what one expert may say they may have an agenda. Reach out to 2 or 3 different kind of independent experts who may be able to give you a kind of a well-rounded answer. And as a journalist, you put all that information together. Yeah.
Oh, this is very interesting. How is science reporting different from climate reporting? The rules of identifying misinfo are same as any other beat, but how different is it?
Yeah. Absolutely. So yes, rules of identifying misinformation, that's what you keep your fact checker cap on, you keep your journalist cap on, whether you're addressing climate change or whether you're addressing health misinformation, you have to have the same tools and techniques. What climate change through this session, what we understood, but there are certain contexts in which climate change information is spread more. There are certain examples, there are certain ways of combating it, which may be specific to research science. So those are the few differences. But yes, the rules of identifying misinformation are the same. How is science reporting different? Climate reporting comes under science reporting. So science would include, your physics or other kinds of reporting. Climate change is one part of science reporting.
Um, this is I don't know if that's a question. So fact check websites hardly check misinformation on climate change or any environmental issues, as they are this as they are this issue as more Western
West.
centric. As an academic researcher, how this challenge can be met?
Yeah.
There are many fact check organizations that are doing environment or climate change related fact checking.
Yeah, I would agree
So
with
yeah,
that.
Aditi.
Yeah, I'll, yeah. So there are, organizations. I mean, the one I work for, of course, but also there are many other organizations which are checking, environment related or climate change related misinformation. And I wouldn't say the issue is West centric. I would say it is more, people in the West are talking about it more, so you see it more in Western media, in English language media. You see it more there, and the reasons for climate misinformation there are also a little different. They are, a lot of it is funded by organizations in India. They kind of are have different reasons for coming up, and it's spread in a different manner. As an academic researcher, I think the most amazing thing would be to understand how climate misinformation arises in the Indian context. Because just as someone who observes and writes about it, I would say it's different from the other parts of the world. But most of the existing research on climate misinformation is from Western countries, because they are doing that kind of research. Very few people in India are doing that. So, as an academic researcher, I would say dig into the reasons of climate misinformation in the Indian context.
This is interesting, Aditi. Communicating climate verification to journalism students is difficult. How can we make it more simpler or make them understand better?
So, actually, I have found it the other way around when I do this climate verification training in with journalism students. It's amazing because they already know so much. They are in because you see this whole youth movement towards climate action. They are already so aware about a lot of things, so their questions are very often at a much higher level than what some like working journalists ask me. So I would say, I don't think we should undermine their intelligence either. Like, we don't need to make it simpler. Like, what we have is simple enough, and uh, make it a conversation. Ask them what are their questions about it, because they see things from a different way. They probably access information in a different way. So having it, like doing a lot more conversation, is a good way to get them to answer, and help you kind of design your training as well. But I do think journalism students now are very kind of very aware. I've had great experiences with journalism students. Yeah.
Planting wrong trees in wrong places does more harm than good. Could you please elaborate on it? I remember
Yeah, this.
you did a story on this, right? So
Yeah, actually, my colleague Sahana did a story on this. I am
ah,
gonna share it in the chat. Uh, it's actually a good story to just get a sense of how, planting wrong trees has caused financial losses in some cases. I think, did the link come on chat or not yet? But also, they have, like, if a wrong tree basically is a tree which is an invasive species which is not part of the ecosystem. If you plant it there, it will suck out the water of that ecosystem or harm the other local species. If you do that, there's more kind of problem than good. So that's one of the ways. But I don't know why this link is not coming through.
it's there, Aditi. It's there.
It's there. Oh, okay, sorry, I've sent it like 3 times now. Okay. Yeah.
Also, I've often seen this while reading climate change fact check or climate change misinformation. Sometimes too much information is also lead to a misinformation, right? A section is saying this and a section is saying that. So then how do you say, okay, then this is the midway? Because there'll be in climate misinformation, I feel it's too much information sometimes. Different branches of science are making their own research and studies. So then how do you
Yeah.
decide which one?
Yeah. So, yeah, of course, this is tough. And again, I'd give the kind of parallel of health misinformation. There are all types of medical or parallel kind of medicine experts. So, when you are reporting on climate change, you look at the source. Okay, there are some sources which are dubious sources. There is someone who may be an expert, who may claim they're an expert, but you can't find like what are the papers they've published. So it all requires a bit of investigation. It requires, like I said, speaking to a diversity of sources, because if you speak to one source and they have a certain school of thought, you'll end up reporting only that school of thought, right? You speak to diverse experts, and out of five, if four are saying one thing and one is saying that climate change doesn't exist, there are higher chances that you would rely on four authentic sources versus one contrarian view. So I think like two ways to do it is: one, just rely on authentic sources. That's the base of any kind of misinformation. And as journalists and as fact checkers, we are trained on identifying what is authentic and what is just a scam. So that, and second, speak to a diversity of sources, like multiple sources. Don't rely on a single source for your information.
We have this question where it's in continuation to what you just said, that there are two schools of scientists in the globe, one who follows IPCC reports and the other set are saying that the IPCC reports are incorrect. So then, as per their research, they're saying like glaciers are melting due to natural reasons. So in that situation, then again, just what would you
Yeah.
want to, your comments, please?
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So on the glaciers are melting. Yes, they're probably melting. But again, like, what is the pace of melting of these glaciers, right? Like when we say climate is changing, yes, climate is changing. But what is the pace? It's faster than ever before. And that pace is what is causing the problem. Every aspect has an age or lifespan, yes. But what is the age that it has and what is the lifespan that it has now? Everything is happening much faster, it's much more intense, it's much more frequent, and those are the signs which are the problematic signs. And when there are, you say there are two schools of thoughts, I would say investigate further into the scientists. Are there any agendas? Are there any reasons why they are disagreeing? And if they are disagreeing and it's authentic information, you can report that as well, that there are two schools of thoughts on this piece of information, and both are come from authentic sources. So again, science is changing, research changes, there is uncertainty. Report that. Everything is not a, you can't always have a absolute answer for many things within climate change. So yeah, those would be my comments on that.
So, thank you. Sorry, we will not be able to take any more questions. My colleague has shared a feedback form link in the chat box. Please spare 2 minutes to share your feedback with us. This really helps us in, to organize the topics that you want for the next webinar or share your feedback. It'll just help us to improve. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Aditi, for such an insightful session. It was very, very interesting. And we will be back next month again with a new topic, with a new subject matter expert and a trainer. And to know more about our webinars, please keep following digital space of Data Leads. We keep posting our future training, webinar series, everything. So please follow us there. And then, not the last least, I'm wishing all the beautiful women a very happy International Women's Day tomorrow, and also wishing everybody a very happy Holi. Please play safe and stay safe and enjoy yourself. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be back soon. Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.